fantastic panel planning for WebXR augmented reality in the headset. On Tuesday, Meta's Connect event brought us some pretty mind-blowing revelations on WebXR, particularly on the mixed reality pass-through front. And we just heard some great news about the W3C AR and navigation API modules. And now Terry XR Schussler is joining us with an outstanding panel to help us not only unpack the impact of this new generation of devices that is coming out, but what we as makers need to be doing to plan for the days when lightweight, low form factor AR glasses arrive finally and need content and utilities. So Terry, great to see you. And thank you for assembling these experts to shed light on this pivotal moment.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm honored to actually have the panelists that we have. I think we're missing one person needs to be brought in, which is Nonny. There she is. Awesome. So we're complete. Yeah. So today we're gonna really dive in with a number of questions for this amazing panel of OGs in the XR space, I want to start with really brief introduction. And so I lead XR and the M word at Deutsche Telekom. And by the way, for the audience, you can do a drinking game every time we say the M word in its full realization. Feel free to take a shot of a drink of your choice. We'll try to focus on a practical technology today. So let's do a quick round of introductions. We'll start with Nonny de la Peña.
Let's see, do I need to unmute myself? No.
Yeah,
okay.
You're good.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Nonny de la Peña. I am the founder of Emblematic Group. And I also have more recently started a WebXR button-based no-code tool called Reach.love. And I'm founding director of a new center for Arizona State University on narrative and emerging media.
Great. Thank you, Nonny. Next, we'll ask John Haddick to introduce himself.
Hey, everyone. John Haddick, the CTO of ThinkReality at Lenovo. It's our enterprise AR and VR business unit. Thanks a lot for having me.
Great. Thanks, John. And then next, we'll talk with Eve Weston.
Hi, I'm the creator of the award-winning world's first 360 VR sitcom and author of The Taxonomy for Immersive Point of View, and I work as a professor and consultant for experience design and storytelling.
Fantastic. And then last but not least, Preston Platt.
Hello, I'm Preston Platt. I kind of have 12 years of experience in the AR field. I am the founder and CTO of Rock Paper Reality, where we kind of like work with large companies on how they do their like AR rollouts for products and marketing deployments and things like that.
Very cool. So again, welcome to all of you. I'm really grateful that you were able to be present today and share your knowledge and your expertise. I want to start with a question for John. So part of what I'd like to do is help make sure the audience understands what things are. And so, John, if you could explain a little bit more specifically about what pass-through is for hybrid VR AR devices.
Sure. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the promise of AR and the early devices in that space that allow optical see-through, where your eyes see the real world naturally, and then overlay content almost like a layer onto that world. There's lots of tricks to get that content to look like it blends with the real world. You see some amazing work in hardware from like the Magic Leap 2 with shadowing and stuff like that. But in the end, you're stuck with what's available to a composited image optically. And so VR is the opposite, where you have completely opaque and no presence in the real world. Maybe you have some pass-through cameras for setting up your Guardians. This next generation that's coming out, you hear lots of announcements. We've made an announcement, almost at the M word. Lots of people have made announcements. And what's happening in this generation of devices is you have very high quality, very low latency RGB cameras looking at the real world. And you have a render engine that has some awareness of the real world. And then you composite your digital content with the recorded content. There's a lot of work and a lot of challenges with that, matching the focal length of the camera to the focal length of your optics, dynamic range, lighting. So it's just a huge area of new technology explosion, and it's enabling some really exciting creative possibilities, as well as just lifestyle possibilities. Being from the enterprise side, we're much more focused on initial benefits of user comfort, user safety. Someone putting on a headset for the first time, you'll see a demo where 15 people will be in a room. The first person is really excited But as soon as they bump into a wall or bump into another person, you never get the second person to raise their hand and want to do the demo. And so with pass-through, you get through that because you feel comfortable in your environment. You know who's watching, you know who's looking at you, you know what, if they're making faces. So it's just a much more relaxing environment as well as a creative environment.
Absolutely. No, that's a very, very valid point. So let's talk to Preston about how the introduction of pass-through is going to impact the experience design process, for hybrid devices. And specifically, do you think WebXR properly supports pass-through HMD experiences today?
Yeah, I think the cool thing is that a lot of these web AR experiences that we do make right now, effectively are ready for pass-through, considering they take into the whole augmented reality input focus, right? So the biggest change is UX and UI, because right now when we do web AR experiences, we're using the phone, custom CSS to be able to interact with our button logic. Now we're doing raycast logic against 3D atmospheric UI, right? So that's kind of the biggest change or consideration. It does support it. I actually on Twitter yesterday, I saw somebody hooked up the Quest Pro and got the pass-through working, which was really cool to see. So it does work. The question, though, is what features will we have, right? And that's always the biggest question, because WebVR APIs were great. WebXR APIs are now really good. The question is, are we going to get meshing? Are we going to get some LiDAR-based occlusion effects? What are we going to get there? So I think that's going to be soon to be seen. But, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, Nonny, a lot of the web, today, the 2D web was built using, no-code platforms like Wix or WordPress, where somebody could go in and quickly, produce a user experience of their own. Do you think there are mature no-code platforms for WebXR delivery, and are they really no-code or are they low-code?
So that's the thing that, listen, there are a few of them out there that have got sort of simpler no code that's like Styly, that's trying to make some inroads for fashion. Of course, Sumerian, which was Amazon's attempt to do WebXR, they pulled the plug on that. And if you looked at the interface, it was incredibly difficult. It was really a weird mashup between Unreal and Unity. And so it was really like more code than no code, right? Or low code. It was more code, I would call it. So, I've been slowly building Reach.love as something that just kind of throws out the entire design that we've seen in the past, in an attempt to really go button-based. We are going to be launching our beta in about a month. So watch the space, Reach.love, to really give people an opportunity to just start to understand, if we're going to grow this world, we have to have more content creators. And people have to understand how to create spatially. And right now, like if you try to draw spatially, like if you take a drawing pen, like that great Lenovo pen, right, that I had a play with at one point, it's hard to start to draw with volume and think about drawing with volume because we're so used to this flat image. So one of the things that we've got to do is really help people understand how to do things spatially and make it easy for them to start to create spatial content.
Yeah, I agree. Eve, no-code WebXR platforms seem ideal for things like data visualization and storytelling, right, where there's a lot of immersive content being presented. How do you see immersive storytelling expanding with the increased availability of WebXR compatible HMDs, head-worn devices?
Yeah, I think it's gonna give us more ways to tell story. And one of the things I'm most excited about that I'm reminded of as I'm hearing this conversation is just AR becoming more experiential. When we use it on our phones, it's over there, but it's harder for us to engage and be involved in the same world. So that's something I'm excited about. With VR, we're going into the world of the characters, and with AR and pass through, they're going to be able to come join us in our world, which is really exciting. One of the reasons I got into this space is because I recognize that everyone has their expertise and not everyone can do it all, right? So the technologists are building amazing things in this space. They're not professional storytellers, nor should they have to be, right? The same way that storytellers have spent a really long time getting good at their craft, and they shouldn't have to learn to code. they need to work together. And so that's one of the things that no code will really allow, is it'll give storytellers access to the tools and platforms they need to participate in this space, just like Nonny was saying. And then also the increased availability of devices will give us an audience, right? If it's easier for people to access it, then the creators have someone to create for, which will justify the investment in stories by brands, advertisers, and creatives. And it'll allow for more experimentation to help us discover a broader range of how we can tell stories in this space. The taxonomy that I authored speaks to that a little bit, and that it gives language to points of view that we didn't really have words to talk about before, because they didn't apply in narrative and purely narrative and visual media. So if you're curious to learn more about that, I've recently posted some of the stuff that was previously only in very expensive published volumes on my Medium page, and I'm always happy to chat more about that.
Yeah, that's great, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's really one of the best things about our community, is that we tend to be pretty open with our ideas and sharing our learnings with each other. And it's one of the reasons why I love being in the XR space more than almost any other technology area I've been involved with in my career. It's much more collaborative and less competitive in that regard. John, I talked about data visualization and storytelling, which is, kind of a balance of both consumer and enterprise type of use cases. But dominantly today, devices and, Quest Pro is a good example. ThinkReality VRX is a good example. These devices that are coming out are targeting enterprise class use cases. So what do you think are the most targetable enterprise use cases for WebXR deployment on HMDs?
Yeah, I think in general, it's about content availability, right? And that's the whole advantage of WebXR in general. The thing that's great about these pass-through camera HMDs is you don't have to render the whole scene, because one of the bottlenecks of WebXR is the bandwidth. And so now that you only have to render your asset and not the whole environment, that helps cut down the model immensely. And so just think about any scenario where there's like an object that you need to look at, right? So it could be browsing an equipment library or browsing an inventory list or things like that. Just having that quick look view, having things pop out in 3D and say, yeah, that's definitely the same as the greasy thing over there that I can barely see in the dim lighting of my room. I pop up the 3D model right from the catalog, and I confirm that's the object, and I could even bring in some more constructions or things like that. So sales visualization, another situation where you just that quick look browsability, and then you can build more interactive experiences from there. But in enterprise, you don't always have the guarantee of bandwidth, and so having web apps and stuff where you cache some of that content offline, maybe it's not the full library, that's where you get some different workflow capabilities. But really, it's tied to how reliable the bandwidth is today. In a consumer environment, that's not quite the same restriction. But that's kind of like, so it's that quick look browsing is really the biggest first end use case.
Okay, that makes tons of sense. You brought up, you guys all brought up this issue of like affordance and understanding spatial content. Preston, one thing about WebXR, which is really interesting, is it enables sort of a fast 2D to 3D transition, in browser, right? So I can be on a shopping website and then I can jump directly into a sort of 3D immersive product experience. Do you think that WebXR today should be focusing on being used for narrowband applications embedded in traditional web experiences? And if so, what type of XR experiences do you think are better deployed this way? Going targeting an HMD delivery versus a traditional browser experience.
Yeah, so I think smaller experiences are always better. I obviously like way more interactive WebXR experiences because I think that's the whole point of WebXR for the most part. I think some things that struggle though are physics for the most part. Physics have always been really tough through the web, and I think that's a lot to do with like OpenGL and what we can take care of as far as like what threads we get through Chrome or whatever to run that processing. But yeah, lighting is rough. Obviously, materials are rough. So like things that you can do that aren't going to take too much on the beauty spectrum and more on just the simplistic interaction, I always think is better. You want to have a low poly scene because you have to remember we're using a browser. Everything we're doing is downloaded, right? So you can't have super long load times here. Like you want to keep it under 200 megabytes. So yeah, and I mean, obviously, like some design considerations are if you have ideas that take into consideration the real world, you probably can't use those, right? So you kind of need to make some assumptions. The cool part is if you support something like an image target, you can still get into mixed reality by putting that image target on a box or something, right? That you pre-knew, add occlusion to that, and you're off the races. But yeah, I do think it's smaller ideas. It's smaller interactive ideas. I think are still the best today. We'll see. Open GPU though. We'll see.
Yeah, for sure. One of the issues that we have today with mobile apps is the aggregation of their availability through app stores also creates a problem for search and discoverability and interchange between those applications, right? Everything is very monolithic. It's very frictional for a user to go through the journey of getting the service value of an application that they don't already have installed on their device. And we lean into the web as being a way of removing many steps of friction that users have. Eve, what do you think are the challenges and opportunities related to distributing experiences built using WebXR, and how do we address discoverability and search in this context?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really interesting because WebXR sort of presents some pros and some cons. As you mentioned, in VR right now with all the apps, there are so many layers. Like there's no clear place where you can definitely go to find what you want. Different headsets have different apps available. Sometimes even if you're in one headset, there's let's say the Oculus Store, but then there's also the App Lab. So they're different places. They're not all in one place. Then there's what's already in your library. So it's actually quite difficult and challenging to search. So in some ways, WebXR with the web, we already have an infrastructure and experience with how to search and discover on the web. So I think that's definitely a pro. On the con, like it's that browsing is a little bit harder to do. Like you would need to know what to look for. I think, with the app situation, even if you know what you're looking for, sometimes it can be very hard to find it with WebXR and the search techniques we're used to. If you know what you're looking for, it's going to be fine. But I think, cataloging stuff will be really helpful. One of the initiatives I started was the Look Club, which is available online at the look.club, which is a searchable database of immersive narrative. And the intention is to make it easier for people to find what they want to watch, whether they know what it is or not, right? They can discover new content by browsing. They can discover new content by searching the type of experience they want. Do they want to be able to impact the story or scene? You can actually search by that, which is really unique. So I think something like that and having, cooperation and coordination with the platforms would be helpful. I know that, Terry, you were instrumental in the founding of the Metaverse Standards Forum, and I feel like partnering with something like that to create a way to make sure that we are aware of the content out there and can make it more visible. There's going to be enough for everyone. I don't think that the platforms need to feel like they have to keep everyone out and only showcase their content. There's going to be, too much of their content for any one person to get through, and there's going to be plenty that they have to offer that other folks don't. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked yesterday, and we're sort of at the starting phase that we were at with web, 1.0 in the 90s, where people would curate their own links of their favorite sites around specific topics and then share that on their web page. And eventually, incrementally, those turned into like link rings, and then ultimately Yahoo and portals, right? So,
Yeah.
Do you think there's an opportunity for somebody to build an equivalent sort of just, spatial discovery zone for you're doing with Look.club, but more holistically and bigger? Where do you think that might go?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for partners to expand all the time. So if that's something that you're out there and you're interested in doing, reach out. I absolutely think there's room in the space for that.
Okay, good. So Nonny, I want to throw a question to you. We talked a little bit about Preston brought up the issue of performances. Did John optimizing the content and the assets, and we know that production of content is a big cost factor in building user experiences in WebXR. In some cases, it's the dominant aspect, right? Nonny, how do we address qualitative and performant content creation? Because despite the existence of platforms like Sketchfab and TurboSquid, CG Trader, Unity Asset Store, a lot of those assets aren't really designed for performant delivery through WebXR. So what do you think we can do to, better leverage no-code, low-code platforms to deliver good WebXR experiences to facilitate a faster and less costly process for developers?
So there's a couple of things, of course. One is just pure education. Developers have to understand, that they need to be also prepared for formats that they're not used to, like, GLDFs or GLDs. So just try to get them to understand why that ecosystem is important to them to create within, right? We just need to educate people the value of making sure their assets can be optimized in those ways. And of course, Sketchfab is a great place to sort of throw your FBX up and then export it into a GLTF and see what it looks like, right? And just, there are tools to make it easy for people to understand that part of the process. The other part, of course, is pure streaming. And there are a couple companies, one in which I'm working with in Stealth for a major AR platform, that are really looking into how to tap into edge computing in a more significant way. How can we use, basically GPUs that are down, are not, idle, and use that space to deliver content wherever you are. So it's like literally searching the clouds for, bandwidth that isn't being used, and then tapping into it and then using that as a delivery streaming system. So that's one of the ways in which I'm literally, working with a company that is in Stealth, a major company, to deliver to another major company an AR experience on a pair of glasses. So that's going to be really important. And then the final thing is just, again, why would somebody want to use those kind of systems? And it's to tell the kind of stories they want to tell, or create the kind of content. I think we're still a way before we really figure out some of the best AR games. I really miss one that I had on my iPhone in 2008, that you could hold your phone up and then you could press the button and it would burn somebody. It'd shoot like burning rays into somebody's face or rockets at them. And so you could be in a meeting, and if you hated somebody, you could be firing rockets at them and they would never know. So, something like that. I just miss some of these just early ideas of what AR offered you. But I think we're still a little way from that. I can't wait until somebody has some breakthrough thinking about, beyond what we had originally with the HoloLens. Do you remember that first AR game where you had to project on the wall around your office? It was cool, but it was very limited.
So again, Preston, that's a call out to you.
Again, that's why I'm so invested in Reach.love, is to try to make these button-based tools. Go ahead, Preston. Help us out here.
Well, I was going to say,
figure out the why.
The call out to you, Preston, is that you have to build the Evil Eye app for the ThinkReality A3 glasses, right? So instead of gaze being a selector, if I continue the gaze past the 2 seconds, then it becomes the evil eye interaction, and we shoot rays.
Blow them up.
Yeah.
Blow them up.
Just for Nonny. Just for you. I'll build that for you real quick, okay? You can have it back on the web.
So actually, I want to inject a question you're ready for, Preston. So just, as we look at the tooling of content creation that we have with LiDAR-enabled phones, and we're able to start to capture really quickly real-world objects and digital twin them, do you see a flow for WebXR developers to use mobile phones as low-cost solutions for building content from real-world objects and delivering that in WebXR? What's the process that you would recommend people look at today to go down that path of exploration?
Yeah, okay. So Polycam 3D, right, which is a readily available app, is insane. I would highly suggest that one. But I think, one of the questions that I saw in here was like something about location-based AR, right? Niantic recently kind of purchased Eighth Wall, and Eighth Wall has this thing called Lightship VPS that's out. They have a great kind of 3D tool that they use to capture the location that you want to deploy 3D content at. And so, when we get into like what I was talking about earlier about like what features exist for WebXR and these APIs, I mean, the fact that Lightship VPS can do location-based scanning and then use that as occlusion or relative context to how you're going to deploy content is already like that very great first step. So, I hope, does that answer that question appropriately?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good tool to refer people to.
Yep,
Absolutely.
but in general, right? Like I think a lot of people expect that they can scan an object and that it's usable in AR. You have to remember that there's a couple of things there, right? Whatever you're scanning, you're lighting in a specific direction. That lighting is going to be baked into that model. There are tools, right, that are out there that are de-lighting tools that you can run through that'll kind of strip the light out. And obviously, if you're a 3D artist, it's not hard to take that and then convert it into something that's very usable. But decimation tools are super vital, just making sure that you don't have a 2 million polygon thing. But like I said, Polycam can do all that on the fly. So
Yeah, that's a great recommendation for sure. Okay, we got a few more questions before we run out of time. So, John, I'm really interested in understanding as a hardware designer how you think WebXR is going to impact offerings from manufacturers who are building next generation hybrid devices that can do either AR first doing VR, VR, doing AR. Do you think they're going to be forced to increase their level of support of WebXR to be competitive with each other?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, what we're seeing is the whole market is going to open when we have access, sort of like democratization of information, right? But you can't have that without a good network. And so there's no mystery why someone from Deutsche Telekom is a great sponsor for this topic, because without your networks, we can't deliver these experiences. And, satellites are great, but the latency is not there for a real-time application. And so I think that's really the biggest thing is all of us, I'm sure, are working on many network integration projects, both from cloud render, where it happens in the cloud, to WebXR, where it happens on device. And there's just going to be different types of content, different weight assets. Excited to learn more about the Web GPU project. But there's just, that's first and foremost, it's connectivity. And so, with the new Wi-Fi standards coming out, with 5G implementation getting broader and broader, you're going to see connectivity being a major theme, because that's where we do all this enablement and all this creativity, is by having access to the device. Because in enterprise, you pretty much know in advance what you're going to do, and so you pre-deploy the app. It's a highly optimized app that someone spent a lot of money on, but that doesn't get the broad adoption, and that doesn't sort of democratize access to learning, gaming, education, virtual collaboration. And that's the social pivot that's happening, but it doesn't happen without the network. And so you're going to see, as devices get smaller and smaller, how do you cram that network? How do you cram that radio or that battery power into the device? That's when you see the most creativity coming out from a hardware perspective, is lightweight devices that still have that connectivity. And that's going to be a pretty exciting revolution for everyone.
Do you think that's going to also change the way you treat browser on device? Because browser is not just a utility, for accessing the internet, but it's more intrinsic. If we go into an immersive experience, it's intrinsic to the purpose of it, of a head-worn device in general.
And that's where, like, the traditional sense of the browser, it makes sense that you could have multiple browser windows up in sort of the 2D interface that everyone's used to. But the browser is a tool, the browser is an interface. It's everything you do in XR is going to become much more, not embedded, but immersive, right? So, real-time discovery, like a TV on your wall, is like the very simplest version of that. Could have a stream of things you might be interested in, and you walk by and you check it out. But, when you actually choose to invest in that experience by popping it out to like a full-scale experience, an immersive experience, right? That's where the SDK of the headset has to be pretty seamless, because, maybe one type of content's better cloud rendered, another type of content's better browser rendered, and another type of content, it's a massive file that has some security concerns or something, and you want to pre-download it as an application. The headset SDK has to make that seamlessly integrate into your real-world environment once you have pass-through and AR experiences.
Okay, cool. Last question for Eve, and then we're going to do a speed round if I have time. So Eve, we talk about storytelling as being a really great use case for immersive XR. How do you think storytelling itself will change as a result of the availability and consumption of hybrid real XR devices?
Yeah, I think that's really exciting. I mean, really, we'll have new ways of telling stories and a wider audience to reach, which is fantastic. So, I think one of the things that I find people get stuck on is really they're used to creating for specific platforms. And so we will now have opportunities to think differently. So the basics of storytelling don't change, but how we apply them absolutely changes. And so that's sort of one of the things that I've created is a storytelling development process for XR that I use both with like students and clients. And I'll be presenting it in Europe later this fall, but it has, an experience summary, a story anchor, an experiential viewpoint expression, pillars of game, and it sort of puts you through your paces to make you understand what you're crafting and why, and that it's tailored for the platform. So I think that's really like I was saying earlier with AR, suddenly the stories are going to be able to be happening in our space. We don't have to go to the story world. The characters of the story world can come to us. And how do we make use of that specific ability that we didn't have before to tell the kinds of stories that are best suited to that? And we tell different stories in VR, and we tell different stories in real life, and we tell different stories on flat screens, right? There's a best way to tell for each platform, and that's what I'm really excited about, is to finally really be able to dig in and figure out what those are for AR, because I think we've all sort of been waiting on the fence. we have felt like we've had limited AR, and I think now the sort of handcuffs are coming off, and we're really going to be able to explore that space in a more truly experiential way.
Thank you, Eve.
Well,
and Terry.
Thank you. We're out of time, and I appreciate everybody very much for your presence today and your participation.
Terry, thank you. I hate to cut you off because this conversation could go on, and I want to hear your quick fire round, what that was going to be.
As I say, thanks for sparing us, Daniel.
Guests today. AR is XR is for me the gift that keeps on giving. Not a month goes by when there's another exciting development. Thank you all so much. We'll be watching that space with you. And Preston, I want to play that evil eye thing with Nonny sometime.
All right. Yeah. All right. I'll put a link in the chat.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. All right.